Russian military exercises in Belarus and the Black Sea began as Ukraine and its Western allies feared that Moscow may complete preparations for a renewed military assault on Ukraine. During this period, Russia will completely block the Azov Sea, leaving no possibility for ships to leave the ports of Berdiansk and Mariupol for the Black Sea and sealing international routes to Ukrainian seaports. As part of its exercises in the Black Sea, Moscow has declared large swaths of the sea around the Crimean Peninsula and the Ukrainian port of Odessa unsafe for navigation during its drills, as well as the southern half of the Sea of Azov, the Ukrainian Naval Forces Command said. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba condemned the move, describing it as a tactic of hybrid warfare. He said, "Unprecedented coverage of maneuvers makes navigation in both seas virtually impossible. In essence, this is a significant and unjustified complication of international shipping, especially trade, which can cause complex economic and social consequences, especially for the ports of Ukraine." The drills are expected to involve 140 warships and support vessels, 60 planes, 1,000 units of military hardware, and about 10,000 servicemen. These exercises are part of a series of military drills demonstrating strength during the current Russia-NATO standoff. For example, on the 21st of January, Russia, Iran, and China began a trilateral naval exercise in the north of the Indian Ocean. On the 31st of January, the Russian Northern Fleet conducted drills in the Norwegian Sea. Russian exercises in the Baltic and Black Seas at the end of January ended prematurely on the 31st of January, which some believed was a diplomatic gesture. In fact, the drills ended earlier because of bad weather. The blockade has underscored the vulnerability of Ukraine's southern coastline and its ports, as well as the inability of Ukraine and NATO to deter Moscow in the Black Sea. Director of the New Geopolitics Research Network, Mikhaila Seimas said, "Unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have a proper navy yet, and NATO doesn't have a proper strategy on how to deal with Russia. That's why Russia is dictating the strategy in the Black Sea." Ukraine is no stranger to efforts by Russia to limit freedom of navigation in the Sea of Azov, the body of water between the Crimean Peninsula and the Ukrainian and Russian mainland. In 2018, Russian ships backed by warplanes and helicopters fired on 3 Ukrainian vessels traveling to the port of Mariupol in eastern Ukraine. Russia detained 24 Ukrainian sailors for several months. But the number and type of Russian ships dispatched to the Black Sea for exercises this week are much greater than anything that has been seen in recent years. Russia's apparent attempts to deny Ukraine access to international waterways have sparked considerable alarm in Kiev at a time when the country is already on high alert over a mounting Russian military build-up to the north, east, and south of Ukraine. The Kremlin first began concentrating troops in Russian-occupied Crimea and some Russian regions close to Ukraine in the final months of 2021. Beginning in late January 2022, Moscow has also sent tens of thousands of soldiers into neighboring Belarus, where they have been deployed to the south of the country along the 1,000 km Belarusian border with Ukraine. Russia's saber-rattling has been accompanied by a series of ultimatums calling on the international community to officially rule out future Ukrainian NATO membership and effectively abandon the country to the geopolitical wilderness. The West has so far rejected these demands while calling on Vladimir Putin to de-escalate. A series of high-level diplomatic initiatives in recent weeks have failed to produce any breakthroughs. Instead, fears are growing that Putin may be about to order a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and spark the biggest European conflict since World War II. As the world watches Ukraine's land borders with Russia and Belarus for indications of Putin's threatened offensive, there are now fears that a new maritime front may be emerging in the Black Sea. Responding to news of Russia's planned naval exercises, Andriy Klimenko of Ukraine's Institute of Black Sea Strategic Studies warned that the restrictions represented a significant escalation in the ongoing Kremlin encirclement of Ukraine. He said, "I don't want to spread any panic, but this looks very similar to preparations for a naval blockade of Ukrainian ports." As Putin weighs up how best to proceed against Ukraine, a naval blockade is a potentially attractive option. While a major land offensive would be likely to result in high numbers of Russian casualties, a blockade of Ukrainian ports could be undertaken without the risk of military losses. Losing access to the Black Sea would have devastating consequences for the Ukrainian economy, which relies heavily on agricultural and industrial exports flowing to international markets through the country's Black Sea ports such as Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv. Local economies in coastal regions would also be badly hit by any slowdown in trade. Moscow's latest Black Sea gambit comes following years of escalating Russian interference targeting Ukrainian merchant shipping in the nearby Sea of Azov. Ever since the completion of the Crimean bridge connecting the Russian-occupied Ukrainian peninsula with the Russian mainland, the Kremlin has introduced an expanding range of restrictions on Ukrainian and international vessels using ports along southeastern Ukraine's Azov Sea coastline. Ukraine has long condemned Russian efforts to disrupt shipping in the Sea of Azov and has repeatedly called for an international response. However, the international community has failed to impose additional costs on the Kremlin. Many in Kiev now fear that this inaction may have encouraged Putin to attempt a far more ambitious maritime blockade. Ukraine itself is currently in no shape to resist Russia at sea. While the Ukrainian military has undergone a dramatic transformation since 2014, Ukraine lost most of its already modest naval assets during the seizure of Crimea. As a result, the Ukrainian navy is hopelessly outgunned and outnumbered by Russia's maritime forces. Work is underway to create what will, in effect, be a new Ukrainian navy, but progress is proving slow despite assistance from the US and UK. The US Embassy in Kiev called Moscow's unilaterally imposed maritime restrictions a continuation of Russia's economic warfare against Ukraine. Under the pretext of military exercises, Russia restricts Ukraine's maritime sovereignty, limits freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, Sea of Azov, and impedes maritime traffic essential to Ukraine's economy, embassy officials tweeted. Ukraine will be hoping these words of condemnation are soon followed by suitable countermeasures, with Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov leading calls for an emphatic response to Putin's latest escalation. International waters are blocked by Russia, he stated in a social media post. Our partners showed a strong response to Russia by supplying arms to Ukraine. Now we also expect a unified reaction. When Russian ships can't enter the world's ports, they'll understand the price of their impudence. On the other side, Baltic leaders called for a bolstered NATO troop presence on the alliance's eastern flank. The call for an additional force presence comes amid a backdrop of escalating tensions with Russia over the fate of Ukraine. Baltic leaders said the NATO eastern flank required a bolstered troop presence during a meeting in Berlin with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The three Baltic leaders, Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, Latvian Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš, and Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda were in Berlin as European leaders and their US counterparts still hope to deter Russia from escalating tensions with Ukraine. The three Baltic leaders sought to encourage Germany to play an increased role in security arrangements in the Baltic region due to Moscow's military build-up on Ukraine's borders. Scholz warned Russia of serious economic, political and strategic consequences should it invade Ukraine. The German Chancellor also reiterated calls for de-escalation. Latvian Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš told DW, "We have, as we speak today, 10 NATO member states militaries in Latvia. We don't feel a direct military threat." He added Russian military posturing on Ukraine's borders has been destabilizing for the entire region. He also said, "I think it's very important to strengthen NATO's presence along the eastern flank, that is from the Baltic down to the Black Sea." Estonia's Prime Minister Kaja Kallas said, "Our focus is on supporting Ukraine. De-escalation cannot come at gunpoint and the expense of Ukraine." NATO ally and Nordic Baltic nation Denmark also said that it is prepared to host US troops on its soil as part of a new bilateral defense agreement with the US. Denmark was on the front line of the Cold War due to its Baltic coastline. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said her country's willingness to host a US troop presence was not prompted by Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's borders. In response to the increased Russian military threat, Ukraine's military regularly conducts its own military drills. In particular, Ukrainian soldiers trained how to repel a possible amphibious invasion of Russian troops, using Ukrainian rocket launchers such as Hurricane and the newest Neptune, designed specifically as a rocket system for coast protection.